In an earlier video, I talk about the fact that I play Call of Cthulhu in the modern age, not a century ago. Now, one reason that many keepers are afraid to play in the modern age is that all of our wealth of amazing technology might destroy the ability of the horrors to be, horrifying. Is this true? Let's pick this apart bit by bit. What exactly does the modern age give us for tools, and how can we turn this to our advantage as a keeper? Yeah, we have machine guns. But you know what? We had machine guns in the 1920s. And in fact, in the 1920s, it was easier to buy a machine gun than today. You could walk into a gun store and straight up buy a Tommy gun, just a hardware store even, or a Sten gun, or even an anti-tank gun. This anti-tank ad is from 1960. So the fact is, we don't really have weapons that are better than we have nowadays. Yes, a modern gun is slightly lighter and better than a 1920 gun, but not by that much. Maybe if you're on the front line in the trenches, it is, but if you're walking around the sewers or a back area, a modern weapon is going to be just fine. Small arms development hasn't really advanced very quickly. But even if we did have better guns in the modern age, so what? Here's a picture of one of our star spawn. I hope you can see the tiny little people in the corner running away. If this star spawn wasn't made of non-terrestrial matter, then bullets from those people would only penetrate its body the equivalent of a millimeter or two, less than a bee sting. Size matters. If you've seen my essays on how to fight Cthulhu monsters, then you know that guns don't help you that much. Here's some links to those. Now, let's say that you're not fighting those awful things, you're just fighting cultists. Well, cultists, have the same weapon access that the players do. Plus, they're less likely to care about the country's laws. They're better organized than the players. They're really good at smuggling. Now, in the 1920s literature, racist authors would describe cultists as being primitive with knives or whatnot, while the noble white men had guns so they can kill lots of them. Now, although Lovecraft was also a racist, this is not how he described cultists. He had his cultists be deadlier than the white men, more dangerous. Okay, they would kill you with poisonous drugs and secret curses. The guys I'm talking about are people like Seabury Quinn, Dennis Wheatley, and so forth. But today, nobody thinks that a primitive person is armed with a knife. If you were to go to some backwoods country, Somalia or the southern Philippines or whatever, no offense if you're from the Philippines, and you went there looking for these primitive cultists, well, primitive, third world, right? Like, he's probably going to have an AK-47 or worse. So, players are, if anything, outgunned, right? So our weapons aren't going to save us. Things are even worse now than they were. Now, what about the internet? Now, when I designed Call of Cthulhu, I added the skill of library use because I grew up in libraries and I spent lots of time in those musty old corridors. I'd sneak around the dark halls of Provo City Library and find creepy old books about magic, seriously. And this was my reality. When I worked at Chaosium, my standard phone call for finding out any kind of information when creating a scenario was the reference desk at the local library. I just called the librarian and asked him anything. These are some of the questions I actually asked them. They were super handy. Now, of course, I haven't phoned the reference library in decades. Now it's all on the internet. So I'm not saying the library use skill is totally outmoded. No, wait, yes, I am. The library use skill is totally outmoded. Even with the wealth of the internet, though, not everything is there on the internet. Let me give you an example from quite recently. I wanted to find the story The Damp Man by Alison, I think, Harding. And I'd read this in one of my searches through the libraries as a kid. I found an old copy of Weird Tales, and there was a story, The Damp Man. I read it standing there in the stacks at Brigham Young University Library. I've been looking for it for like 50 years. It took me years to find a source for it, and then it was totally serendipitous. I was actually ordering DVDs on a website which also produced old science fiction and fantasy books in reprint, and lo and behold, there it was, Alison Harding. Wow! I could tell you about more such things, but you've probably encountered it yourself already, on the internet. You can't find everything there. You especially can't find cult activities on the internet. Not really, but there's two different ways we can go there. See, the cult either wants to stay a secret or it doesn't want to be a secret. Now, if your cult wants to be secret, I would have it use technology to keep itself secret. It would use cyber attacks. Imagine if it could send a Starspawn's mind into the internet to erase things, or curse things. In one role-playing game I ran, based in modern times, we had people that were using their website, and they were putting together information about Lovecraftian stuff. Well, one day the website went down. When the players went to where their servers were, like, the people were all dead and split apart, and they'd actually sent Biakis to kill them. They just said, well, we'll just destroy all the information and get it. We don't want the information to get out. The cultists are murderous. They're smart. They can be tech savvy. They can stop it. And I'm not saying this because I'm saying, oh no, we can't use the internet. What I'm saying is it makes for fun scenarios for the players to have creatures that are fighting against your internet searches by deadly means instead of just, well, I guess I'll Google where is the cultist hideout, instead, something else happens. Now, if your cult wants to be known, then this is a different problem. They're saying, hey, we're this awesome cult. Come join us. I did a scenario in which the whole story is that the players find out that these cultists are trying to put the full scanned text of the Necronomicon online. They want everyone to have access to it. And at first the players are like, oh, this is useful for us. Then they realize, oh my gosh, think of all the crazy people on the internet. Remember that guy that you had that big debate on politics with last week? You don't want him to have the Necronomicon, right? I mean, for one thing, all the world leaders, whether you like them or didn't, would soon be killed by Necronomicon curses. There'd be things rising up everywhere. You've got to stop them and put the Necronomicon online. In other words, this puts you in the position of where I had the cultists trying to keep themselves secret. Now you're the guys trying to stop the cultists from being known. You have to go and prevent their servers and erase them. And then this also, you get an interesting scenario and campaign, which I think is fun. Now, another aspect of modern times is that in the olden days, it was hard to physically get somewhere. In the old Masks of Nyarlathotep campaign by Larry Natilio, if you wanted to go to Egypt, you had to take a steamship. It takes about 3.5 weeks to go from New York to Alexandria. If you want to go from New York to Chicago instead, you get on the train. It takes 20 hours. No wonder they had sleeping compartments, right? But today, we can blip all over the world in a few hours. I went to China last year. I admit the trip took about 20 hours, and it flew really scarily close to North Korea. But, really it's nothing. 20 hours to go to China? I mean, we're spoiled, right? But is this a problem of the modern times? Well, if you must have events happen while they're en route, have them wait till they're in a car. For example, once I arrived in Hong Kong, we had to drive in cars for hours to get to the cities we wanted to visit, and if we'd gone to all the factories, it would have taken even longer. There would have been plenty of time for cultists or monsters to ambush us, but they didn't, because I'm on their side. And we still have places we don't necessarily want to fly to if you want to have somewhere that's hard to get to. A friend of mine lived in Abu Dhabi, and he got to go, he's from Australia, he got to fly with some of the delegation from the Emirates to Somalia. So they landed in Mogadishu. And he said when he got off when the plane landed, he looked and this truck drove up, the fuel truck drove towards the plane, and there was all these guys on it with machine guns. He was like, whoa, what's this? And he was a little nervous, I guess, but they drove up, and then the pilot got off. The pilot had a big suitcase, and he gave the suitcase to the guys with the machine guns. They opened it up, looked at it, and then they refueled the plane. And what my friend told me is that at most airports, the way it works is that whenever your plane lands, it's out of gas, right? Because you only carry enough gas to get there, because any more gas, you're just carrying extra weight. Well, it's not really gasoline, you fuel, right? So you land, and then the airport fuels your plane, and then they bill your airline, and your airline pays them later on. Every airport in the world except Mogadishu. You see, in Mogadishu airport, at least when my friend was flying there was a chance that in a week or a month or whatever, that Mogadishu would be controlled by a different warlord. So they had to get their money up front, cash on the barrelhead. So the suitcase the pilot had was full of cash, and he was literally paying for the gas. The guys with machine guns were there to protect the gasoline and the suitcase full of money. They weren't bad guys necessarily. They're just they're guards, right? Because it's Mogadishu, you gotta have guards. So that's how they refuel the plane in Mogadishu. So I gotta say that That sounds like a really scary place to go by plane. Maybe it's different now, I don't know, but it didn't make me interested in finding out. So you can still block people if you really need to. But in any case, I think that being able to travel somewhere fast is awesome for our games. We can take our players to somewhere as isolated as Svalbard in just a matter of hours. Then it's on to Frozen Terror with awful things ahead. What's the next thing we got? Well, we have modern communications. Let's watch this.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? No shit.
Now, one of my least favorite things about modern horror is that the scriptwriters are often too stupid or too unimaginative to deal with something as simple as a cell phone. So they solve it by putting the cell phone out of service, or they break the phone, or whatever. This is a failure to me. I am fine letting the players have cell phones, because the bad guys have not just cell phones, but supernatural ability. I am absolutely certain that the King in Yellow should have a Twitter feed, and that Nyarlathotep is a major internet presence. I've read more than one story which posits that one of his 1,000 forms is literally an internet thing. Here's an example from a movie I like.
Claire. Hello?
And this is how the film The Babadook solved this problem. Suddenly, that lady's phone isn't a lifeline to get help. It is a source of danger. This is what I do too. I have a whole scenario in the book Petersen's Abominations, published by Chaosium, called A Voice on the Phone. In this, a great old one is sending messages through a cell phone network. If you use communications right, you'll have the players throwing away their cell phones. Look up some creepy pastas or videos about scary cell phones, scary websites, and so forth. Adapt them to your own needs. All will be well. I recommend in passing the Japanese movie Cairo or Pulse, in which there is a website where you can talk to ghosts, and it's not good. So don't fear modern technology. If you can reach out with it, something can reach in. The Cultists have it too, and all of our advances are still nothing compared to the power of the great old ones. This is good for the games. Since we're just as doomed in the 1920s, feel free to do it in the 2020s and have fun while you can.